Hello, everybody. We are really happy to be here today and to have a chance to talk about our country and about animal rights movement there. Yeah, thank you. And the way the war interrupted our work and the consequences which are expected and unexpected, because no one has ever seen what's going on with animal rights movement in a country in the middle of Europe where there's war. So on this photo you could see us, me and Alevtyna, here in Warsaw like a month ago, attending a conference, like our gathering, Anima gathering, and that's us like half a year ago when the war just started. So I was a bit more lucky. I live in Lviv, which is Western Ukraine, which is further from Russia, and it was a bit safer there, but Lviv appeared to be a hub for volunteers, for refugees, and you could see me here. Two photos are from railway station. I guess it was the most attended place for me at the time. So what we did at the very beginning was sending animal food, human food, and stuff like this, like everything needed, to east of Ukraine. And here on the upper right corner, you could see us meeting 39 cats which arrived from Kharkiv, which were evacuated just the first, 2 weeks of the war. And that's us, me and a girl from Estonia, evacuating chickens from a volunteer, our volunteer Open Cages Ukraine, who used to live in eastern Ukraine, and he was so close to bombing that his little shelter, hand shelter, was at risk, so we helped him evacuate. And Alevtyna will talk a bit more about her experience.
I had a bit different experience just because I live in Kiev, and as you all know, Kiev was the main target of Russian troops for the first, I would say, months of the war, and we were not prepared at all. We actually overslept the first bombing on the 24th, so the whole next day we just were panically packing different kinds of bags for different scenarios, for let's say 1 day in a shelter, or 3 days under a building, under destroyed building or something, and for actually leaving the city and leaving the country altogether. So it was predicted that in the night from 24th to 25th, Kiev would be heavily bombed. So we actually spent our first night in the underground station, as you can see there on the left photo. And then we decided to leave Kiev altogether. At that point, it was thought that Kiev is the most dangerous place. And we went to the nearby village, and as we came to find out later, it was actually a huge mistake, because Kiev was kind of safe and all the villages around it were either occupied or heavily bombed. So we spent almost 10 days under constant shellings and witnessed and heard quite a lot of gruesome things. So after 10 days, I have a child of 5 years old, so I had to evacuate with him to Europe, and we traveled for 2 months before coming back to Kiev, which is now more or less safe place. So this was our life 6 months ago, and it's still like that, but it's obviously much, much better. And we changed quite a bit since then, and I think the whole world changed as well. And we now know about the war and the consequences of this war much more than we knew at that time. And today we will tell you just a tiny part of all the consequences that this war has on the whole world, which is more or less connected to the animal rights movement. I will tell you about the food sector and the plant-based market, which and how the war had affected it, and Lena will tell you about the animal welfare issue and the people's attitudes towards animals that had changed as well. And also we will tell you how to help if you want to, and I hope you all want to. So I will start from the food system, because it's my field that I work in, because I've been coordinating the plant-based campaign for the last 5 years in Ukraine. And what we need to know first is that the world before the 24th of February wasn't exactly the nicest place to be overall. And maybe for us right now in Europe and in more developed countries, we don't feel it that much, but we all know who are the real victims of food crisis. And even before the 2022, experts said that it was an unprecedented convergence of different factors that influenced and fueled a very huge food crisis in the world. And you can see here the main factors that affected it. Obviously, it was the pandemic disruptions in food distribution, the demand, particularly the panic shopping that people were doing, and it actually affects the whole world quite a lot. Extreme weather conditions due to climate change, for sure, and poor harvests all over the world, which made many countries unwilling to export a lot of their foodstuffs, and so on and so on. There are so many factors that actually made the situation quite poor, and the food prices index was growing since the mid of 2020, with being like the highest ever in the end of 2021. And when we feel that prices are growing, they obviously kill people in many parts of the world. And the pre-war baseline for hunger and starvation was already quite high, even before that. And as you can see, the numbers are quite devastating. 276 million people were already suffering from acute hunger. Almost half of that, like 145 million people were food insecure or at risk to become food insecure, and almost 50 million children were already malnourished. And it's easy to think about this as numbers, but obviously these are real people who had been suffering quite a while. And then this happened. This is exactly the day that I told you about previously, when Kyiv was bombed, and this invasion actually made the situation much, much worse. And how exactly and why is this slide shows you. This invasion has 3 big Fs, and it's the food, fuel, and fertilizer. And fuel and fertilizer parts are more or less clear and obvious. It's just that Russia is one of the main exporters of both, and I think we all now feel the repercussions of how bad it is that Russia is the main exporter of fuel. But actually fertilizer is even more worrying, because it's not only preventing countries from buying stuff from Russia and Ukraine, but it's also preventing them from growing their own foods. And in many countries, these fertilizers are essential. And I think China and Russia together combined, they are exporters of like 30% of the whole fertilizers in the world. And the food factor is obviously very important, and it's much more multidimensional. I won't be able to cover everything, but I will try as much as I can. And that food price index that I showed earlier actually has a continuation, because it actually peaked even more in February 2022, and then it peaked even more in March, and so on and so on. So exactly when Russia invaded Ukraine. And why it happened is because both Russia and Ukraine are considered global breadbaskets, and particularly Ukraine, despite having a very small percentage in the whole in global GDP, it is a very important producer and exporter of a lot of agricultural commodities and foods and fertilizers as well, especially considering that we have access to both Azov and Black Sea, and Black Sea is like a huge vein of exporting stuff from Ukraine to many countries. And in the 8 months before the invasion, 51 million metric tons of grains were passed through the Black Sea, with Odessa being one of the main deep water ports there. And once again, despite having being only 0.16% of the global GDP, Ukraine is a major supplier of key crops, and you can see here the main ones. Obviously, there are much more. So what happened is that all of the seaports were blocked for almost half a year, and export stopped at all, altogether. And since Ukraine doesn't have planes right now, we can't just transfer it to another means of transportation, and trains are just simply not as effective. So the whole export part just failed. And also a lot of ports were bombed. I think this is one of the most famous examples, because Odessa port was bombed on the next day, or maybe on the same day, when Russia actually agreed to restart shippings and to make ports more or less safe place and not bomb them, but it still happened on the next day. Also, farmland was destroyed in an unprecedented levels, it is estimated the total losses of Ukraine's agriculture sector is up to $4.5 billion USA dollars, and half of it is actually due to farmland destruction by machinery, by heavy machinery, and by shellings. And you can see here it's a Maxar photo from the satellite, and you can see how devastating the shellings are for the farmland in Ukraine. And finally, the war doesn't only affect the current exports and production, but it's also affecting the previous and future production, if it's like possible to say like that, because it's evident that Russia is targeting a lot of storage facilities and silos, which is kind of undermine the overall agricultural sphere in Ukraine, and also a lot of food will not be harvested, a lot of crops will not be harvested this year and probably next year, because a lot of farmers are actually warriors in Ukraine right now, so they just can't do this, and because of farmland destruction. And also there are a lot of examples of storage facilities just being bombed and on fire, and this is just one of them. So why it matters so much? Because Ukraine and Russia, it's like two countries in the whole world, and we can speculate about how it will affect the whole world, but actually there are some estimations already. And we don't know yet how this war will end and when it will end, but if it ends just right now, there are already problems arising. So the food prices I already talked about, and consumer inflation is also growing to unprecedented levels. The hunger levels are going to rise, and if the war stops right now, still almost 50 million people will be suffering from acute hunger. And the same situation is with poverty, because every 1% of rise in food prices will make up to 10 million people severely impoverished. And once again, if the war stops today, still 100 million people will be severely impoverished. And finally, it can make our world a bit less sustainable, just because people are not really worried about sustainability right now. When you don't have enough food or you can't afford basic needs, you probably won't be choosing more sustainable options. And even on the governmental level or on global level, it's already halting a lot of initiatives like this farm-to-fork European strategy that had to be published but eventually was postponed indefinitely. So while I was researching this, I found a lot of media coverage like this, and it totally makes sense, just because this is exactly what's happening. Russia and Putin are blackmailing the world basically by hunger. And why it matters also for us is because plant-based sector is obviously not divided, and it's not isolated from the whole food industry, and it is already clear that it will suffer quite a bit in the whole world because of the shortage of Ukrainian exports, and also because investors are just not ready right now to invest huge amounts of money in plant-based sector as they used to be. And the amazing Privilege organization actually surveyed European plant-based businesses a couple of months ago, and they already found out that they were suffering at that point. And you can see here that most of them, they found that there are higher prices for ingredients, for energy, for transportation, and most of them expected that their products will be even more expensive, and they are already expensive in most part of the world. These are just two examples that may be recognizable to you all, because Oatly actually, partly because of Ukrainian war, they expect not to grow as fast as they expected previously. And there are several restaurants like this, but one of the most famous ice cream places in USA was forced to close just because they didn't have enough sunflower oil and sunflowers that they exported from Ukraine as well. But obviously, Ukrainian plant-based market had suffered the most, and for me personally, it was the most depressing thing when I witnessed it, because I also witnessed the boom in 2020 and 2021 when we had quite a lot of new plant-based meat producers, and it was all very positive and very cool, and we expected to have our first business conference in Kyiv in 2022, our first huge consumer research, and we expected it to be really positive. So obviously it didn't happen, so for me it was a huge blow. And these are just several examples. Maybe some of you will know the first producer from here. I see some people nodding. So this is the first one, Відкриті. It's probably first and most popular producer of hams in Ukraine. They're really cool and cheap and very tasty. And all their facilities were based in Kharkiv. They were all bombed, so they were forced to stop producing stuff, and then they moved to Czech Republic actually, and they're now producing them from Czech Republic. Many restaurants, many producers were forced to stop their production altogether. We had many importers of plant-based products that had their storages bombed as well. So it was quite a huge blow to the whole market, obviously, and most of them are trying to resume their production right now, especially if they are based in Kiev, but it's still a noticeable difference, obviously. And now many initiatives that we had previously seem very not timely, because you probably are not interested in how people, what are people's attitudes toward plant-based products when this is just not something that they care about. So yeah, but we still try to find some silver linings in all these things. Obviously it's quite hard, but we hope that it will affect the world in a positive way as well. And what we expect and what we see already is that probably there would be more cooperation between businesses. The same Proveg survey actually noticed that many plant-based and vegan businesses started to cooperate to make the situation better for everyone. And for us, it's very nice to see, because previously in Ukraine especially, it was very difficult to make plant-based businesses cooperate. They just always were in this strange competition thing. So to make them understand that cooperation is needed to make the whole market better, it was quite hard. And now we hope that it will probably make it easier in Ukraine and in the whole world as well. We also hope that it will make the overall production much more distributed, because obviously relying on one country or on one geographical place for food or for fertilizers is not very sustainable. So we hope that this will show that countries need to produce their own stuff if they're able to do so. And finally, experts think that this war will just showcase how vulnerable and how unsustainable and just simply bad our global food system is. It was evident even before, but this war just showed how blind everyone were before that. So this is a real chance to see and to look at our food system and try to make it better. And there are some organizations and some expert teams who are already working on some ways on how to do this. This is the 7 steps that were proposed by CGIAR, I think. It's like a consulting group of international agricultural research. Yeah, I made it. So they proposed 7 steps of how to make the whole system, the food system, more sustainable. I won't be talking about each of them, but I think the 5th one is one that is most interesting to us, because it's climate-friendly agriculture, it's investment in plant-based products and vegan foods, and we just hope that maybe this will show the whole world that we need to transfer to more sustainable foods after the war ends, obviously. So yeah, this is my part, and then Diana?
So I'll talk a bit more about animals, and especially farm animals, surviving or not surviving the war. Yeah, there aren't that many global researchers on it, as animal farming, factory farming, animals in Ukraine doesn't affect that much global food system, but it affects Ukraine and it affects the animals. Yeah, and my part of presentation would be really difficult to see for people who are sensitive to pictures of dead animals. So just be ready for this, because it's kind of impossible to talk about factory farming struggling the war in Ukraine without it. But yeah, I will speak about something positive as well, don't worry, at the end. So at the beginning of war, we started to think how to get the information about what's going on with factory farming, and we made a research in 5 months about what happened to all animal farms in Ukraine. That's kind of unique, so it's what we did. And this research has data from open sources from media, and also we called and wrote to many farmers, just directly asking them, how are you doing there? Did you manage to survive? What happened to animals? What happened to your employees? So here we'll have some kind of samples which would illustrate the global, this is the whole structure of what happened to farming in Ukraine. On this map you could see different regions in Ukraine. So the red are the most affected by, like the most destroyed, the most animals died there, and this black shadowing is the regions which were invaded and or which are now invaded, like occupied by Russians. So there is a direct correlation between it. So definitely when there is occupation and shelling, so farmers die and their animals die. So we could say that 15% of livestock was destroyed in Ukraine, which means that actually animals died there. And they died of different reasons, but we could definitely say that Russians use food, and like they of course see animals as food, as a weapon against Ukraine. That's what they did was plant market, so with grains, just stopping us from selling, stopping us from growing plants, and the same they did was animal farming. So in this picture, it's a satellite image, you could see that there were direct shelling farms, so it wasn't accident. No, it's their method, of fighting with Ukraine, just destroying like animals so people couldn't use them later. And how do they do this? So what is the most, I would say, ugly is just sometimes Russian soldiers deliberately kill, like shoot animals. And we had evidence from this dairy farm in Chernihiv region, it's northern Ukraine, where 110 cows were killed, shot because soldiers, like Russian soldiers, didn't like their moving, so it was just too loud. So we could say that there wasn't no reason for this, it was kind of for fun. And it happened not only on factory farms, it happened with the small micro farms in villages. We heard stories of people when Russians, when they were stepping back, they just shot all the animals around, just because they were, I don't know, angry and they felt despair, and they just decided to kill everyone who couldn't protect themselves. And I guess you heard that it happened not only with animals but with people as well. The other thing is shelling of farms. So you could see a photo of a farm which was shelled twice by Russian planes, and most of animals died there. Calves, newborn calves, and also people, workers were injured, and one person died. And it's just one of examples of hundreds, I would say, because it was a small farm, and there were all around Ukraine, and people sometimes couldn't evacuate, or like farmers sometimes decide to stay there, to protect animals, like to give them food, and sometimes they die with them. And the same happens with volunteers as well from time to time. One more reason of animal dying is that while farms are being heavily shelled, people couldn't get out of the basement, so they are hiding from bombing, and they couldn't get to the animals to give them food and water. So that's what happened at this farm. It's also northern Ukraine. So actually Russians stepped back from northern Ukraine. That's why we could have more evidence from there, because now the territory is free. That's why we have a lot of examples from this territory. And what you could see that those pigs died from dehydration and starvation, because they just couldn't get, like people couldn't get there and feed them. And not only farm animals die, but also those in the zoos. So they're not very picky at this. That's an ostrich from kind of a zoo, so it's a park in Kyiv region where it was shelled and a lot of ostriches died. But later on I will have a photo from the same park where ostriches are actually saved by Ukrainian soldiers. It will be later. The biggest mass murder happened, of course, with chickens because we have the most of them, yeah, and they heavily depend on feeding systems, yeah, and Russians. So it's Kherson region. It's actually, I believe, Chernobyevka. So it's a place which was bombed so many times, and Russians just decided to switch off power plant. So there was no electricity, and that's why chickens, like the birds, couldn't get the food, and 4 million of them died. Yeah, so it's just enormous to imagine. It was actually very close to ecological disaster there, yeah, because of it. And the farmers did a lot actually to manage the situation somehow. So they tried to give the animals to local people and to donate and to do something, yeah, because in general they couldn't save them at all. So, and again, that's a horrible example, but it shows that factory farming is very vulnerable, yeah, and it depends on a lot of factors. And I know that stuff like this happens not only in Ukraine, but like birds are dying because of climate change, yeah, on farms. And we could use these examples to show that how bad it is for the world, yeah, and how dangerous to put so many animals in one place. Also, we try to get information from fisheries, yeah, which are kind of quite often neglected. Alas, there are no photos, but you could see what farmers told us, yeah. So the farm was directly at the front line, yeah. So all the ponds are polluted, which caused death to all the fish, yeah. And sometimes people who work there couldn't get there anymore, yeah. So their farm is so close to the front line that Russian troops are so close that they couldn't just get there and see what's going on with the fish. Yeah, so if they survive, great, but very often they don't. And one of the reasons fisheries are destroyed is the pollution. Yeah, so fish depends on it a lot, and our seas are polluted, our rivers are polluted, our ground is polluted. Yeah, so, and you can imagine that if there is just one shelling in the pond, like all fish die there, yeah, so that's what's happened at that place. Farms are transforming, so Ukraine is now experiencing something which we haven't ever had before, when we have factory farming and the war, and things are changing, and our food system is trying to adapt somehow, and they could move from plant-based to animals and vice versa. And the example which is not kind of positive is one of the plants which used to make juices, yeah, transformed into meat can production because they couldn't get enough supplies of food and veggies, which are usually traditionally got from eastern and southern part of Ukraine, yeah, which is now shelled. So that's why they decided to make more meat cans, which is kind of sad for the whole movement. But yeah, there is a silver lining here. There is something positive, and sometimes businesses transform in a different way. We had a great example of a mini farm which was growing shrimps. They had their pool in Kyiv region, and now it's not a shrimp farm, it's a veggie farm, so they have figs and basil and jalapeno. And why it happened is because this guy, he's the owner of this mini farm. When Russian troops were like 20 kilometers from his farm, he decided that shrimps are not very sustainable, and you couldn't feed a lot of people with shrimps, actually, so it's kind of profitable business. But he wanted to make something for his community, so he transformed it into a fruit and vegetable growing place. And what he wants to do is to support his community, and actually his plan is to donate the whole farm to community, so it would be community run afterwards, yeah, and he hoped that if anything happens, yeah, local people would have their supply of the most important things which you need for eating, yeah, like fruits and vegetables. main things. The maybe greatest positive thing which happened to Ukraine is that we got candidate status to EU. We applied for it, I guess, second day after the war started, and we were granted it, and it means a lot for us. Apart from what is written in the official document, which is mainly about struggling with corruption and changing legislation system, it means things like transformation of Ukrainian legislation, of Ukrainian law, closer to standard living standards, welfare standards of EU countries, which means that Ukraine will get the law where welfare of animals is not neglected. Yeah? Actually, we hope that it will start happening maybe even before the war started or just after, so we are working on it. The second thing is getting finance. So the more money, of course, the country has, the more opportunities it has, and we are hoping to get grants and investments, yeah, and maybe some technical assistance and more advice from European businesses and governments. Businesses are hopefully joining Ukraine as well, so we hope to get more investments, and hopefully they will invest into something sustainable, yeah, like plant-based businesses and things which at least manage to get to welfare levels. Yeah, so that's what we hope to have. And of course, there's going to be a lot of cooperation between countries. So where Ukrainian farmers will learn a lot from European ones, we'll be able to attend more conferences, yeah, and get more information about how to get more sustainable food system in Ukraine. But now we talked a lot about what's happening in the country level, yeah, and what is there with Ukrainian citizens? How have they changed because of it? We've got here some great samples of people becoming more compassionate no matter what suffering is around them. And my examples will be about farm animals and people who looked after them, which became heroes actually in Ukraine. And the first one is this. That photo, and there was a video, became super popular. It's an elderly lady who evacuated from Mariupol. Mariupol is maybe the city which was like mostly damaged, just destroyed by Russians, and people were fleeing under shelling. And this lady, you see, she's quite small and fragile. She took the most valuable thing for her. It's this rooster, Rooster Tosha. And when she arrived to a refugee camp, so journalists were like shocked because of it. And as you see, the rooster looked more confident, yeah, and a bit stronger than the lady. And that's why there are a lot of fans of this rooster appeared in Ukraine. So at first the news was posted by Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, so it's kind of high level. And then there is a lot of fan art of the rooster evacuating the lady, not vice versa. Yeah, so it's kind of, Tosha the rooster is one of the national heroes, among with some cats and dogs as well. And that's kind of very positive thing for the image of farm animals in general. The second story I want to share is about this man. So you could see a photo of two men, and the one with the backpack is the owner of this cow and the calf. They evacuated from Irpin, like a village next to Irpin, and Irpin is next to Kyiv, which was also shelled by Russians, and it was dangerous to stay there, and there weren't much transport, especially for a cow and a calf. So he just walked. He decided to leave his home and walk for 94 kilometers, yeah, to a safe place. People just saw him, made photos of him, and then he became kind of popular. So others were trying to find him on the way, to feed him, to give something for the animals. And yeah, luckily, so he survived, and they managed to get to some friend of him, and so they were safe later on. But no one said in Ukraine that, oh, come on, why did he take them with him? No, it was a sample of being heroic. Yeah, so you save yourself and you save living beings with you, yeah, even if they are farm animals. Not only civilians help animals around them, but also Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian military people. That's actually a photo of my friend. He is a soldier, and he is very close to front line, and he sent me a video of this goat and the dog. It's a village abandoned now by people, so it's just front lines, so there are no civilians anymore. And animals are left there, and one goat decides that she's actually a dog, so she spends all the time with the soldiers, and they feed her and protect her. And when I asked him what's going on there, like how is the situation in general, how could I help, he said that, alas, you cannot help much, you cannot go, I couldn't go there and evacuate animals, it's dangerous. And the image which he had is like a post-apocalyptic world where there are abandoned animals like goats and dogs, and abandoned rabbits are chased by abandoned dogs. And alas, he couldn't help all of them, but they tried to save at least someone. So this white dog, for example, was evacuated by him, so he managed to take him, the dog, he called White, and now he's in Lviv. Alas, we couldn't do it with all farm animals, because it's just dangerous for soldiers to have them all around because they are producing sounds, yeah. But they try to, so they try to feed them, and it happens a lot in Ukraine. And here we have a photo of Ukrainian soldiers saving like really everyone. You could see the ostrich, so the ostrich is from the same farm, which the footage of which I showed you before. So those who survived were evacuated and soldiers helped. There is a baby squirrel, a cat, a donkey being evacuated, a dog, a baby deer, like all types of animals. And there is so much compassion, and it's kind of a trend now. So news about soldiers rescuing animals, yeah, it's just kind of a regular one. So it's nothing like extraordinary. It's always there. You can Google, you will see a lot of them. And not all of them are online, but what I see from my friends who are not animal rights activists, they are getting more and more compassionate to everyone. And there was a cool story about one guy who wasn't neither vegan nor animal rights activist, but then he saw food like dead animals killed by Russians, and he said, no, animals shouldn't die because of them. And then actually he became a vegetarian and maybe vegan now. So seeing death, yeah, makes people more compassionate, and that's what is extraordinary for our country. Yeah, so how could you become part of these changes? How could you help Ukraine to struggle through this and to survive and help more animals? Yeah, the first thing, yeah, me? The first thing you have to do is to help us with, yeah, maybe it sounds like a lot, but the faster Ukraine wins the war, the faster the suffering ends, the faster we will get chance to continue our regular animal activist job, you know, because now there are territories where we cannot do anything. Yeah, we don't control them. We don't control territories which are occupied, and there are no human rights, no animal rights, no rights at all. So we want to regain control over our country, yeah, to build democracy and to change the law and change the society. And for this, we need to have our country back. Yeah. And to do this, yeah, you need to support us in any possible way. You can go to protests, sign petitions, talk about us, talk about Ukraine, talk about the way the war influences the world, like food crisis, which Alevtyna talked about, the ecocide, the destroyed lands we have and killed animals and people, absolute neglectness of any rights there, yeah, and apparently the risk of nuclear disaster, which I guess you've already heard about. Yeah, so just talk about NAS and don't forget that this exists very, very close.
Yeah, I think the news fatigue is the most devastating thing, is that we don't want to ask people to just talk about us because it's kind of vulnerable position, but we still need to, because the whole world depends on how this war ends. So I hope the world doesn't end. Jeez. So yeah, we would be grateful if you could join these forces, and also if you want to make more animal rights and plant-based advocacy work, we have a list of several organizations that you can support. For example, we have vegan initiatives who are actually actively feeding vegan soldiers, and we have loads of them. We even have a petition in Ukraine for the president to consider having vegan soldier food. We have many shelters for farm animals. We have many organizations who are working to promote veganism even right now and to help animals. This is just a small list of them, but after this speech, maybe a bit later, we'll have all the links in your Eventory pop-up thing, as far as I understand. So yeah, if you want to help, you are always welcomed. And if you have any questions for us, you can write to us or just give us, I don't know, a Slack call, or just come to us. We will be really happy to talk to you. That's it. Sorry for being a bit late.
It's okay. No problem for being late. We already have a couple of questions. We also encourage everyone to go to Eventory app and ask their questions there. So starting from the interesting one, as the meat prices are also growing, some plant-based companies believe this situation can minimize the difference of prices between meat and plant-based products. Do you think it is possible, and can it be a chance for the global plant-based market to overcome this crisis?
Yeah, I actually also found these statistics and this prediction that can help, but to me personally, I'm a bit skeptical. Just because in many, at least for us in Ukraine, in many countries, plant-based meats are still considered a bit less than. So transferring from real meat to a less than product will have it, people won't be that willing to do so. So to be honest, I think that this difference won't be as huge to actually make people buy plant-based products more. And also, still, the prices for plant-based foods is growing as well because of the shortage of so many grains, so many plant-based proteins. So I'm skeptical, but yeah, if it happens, then it would be nice. I hope, but no.
Could I add to the same question?
Yeah.
One more thing which I managed to find is that actually, meat prices are growing all over the world, but it may lead to people moving to plant-based diets, but it may lead to actually worsening the welfare standards for animals in Europe and in the world. And one more thing is, that's one point, and the other that countries, not Ukraine, but other European countries, are trying to grow more grains to feed their animals, and actually is destroying their ecosystems. So there are maybe positive and maybe very negative impacts in general.
Do you have numbers of the farmed animals in Ukraine now and before war?
Farmed animals? Actually, I'm not sure about the numbers, but we could say that it's 15% less than there were before.
At least, because we made this research, I think, in during the first months, and we didn't follow up recently, and we hope to do so quite soon. So I think the numbers can be even higher.
And actually we cannot, for example, when you try to contact farms which are on occupied territories, very often they don't reply and they're destroyed, and it's very difficult to get information from there. So at the moment we try to find what we can, but for exact numbers you need to have better statistics and to be able to reach everyone. That's why a lot of examples were from northern Ukraine, where we could do it now, where it's safe. but from territories which are still occupied, we just don't know.
Yeah, and there is also one more thing that farmers are actually extremely paranoid. So if you call them and just ask about their farms, that they're thinking that you are asking for, I don't know, Russian troops or whatever. So they are not really willing to share information. So yeah, I think real numbers won't be seen until like maybe after the war ends, unfortunately.
Did the invasion shed a new light for you on factory farmers? Because now they are sitting with you on one beat instead of being opponents. What opportunities could you grow out of that? Could you maybe build alliances that might help you later?
I believe that, yeah, so there would be some positive consequences for us, because these examples which we showed also explain them that their systems are not sustainable and they are vulnerable, and they would be more willing, yeah, to change it to something smaller and more animal friendly, yeah, and raising the standards, yeah, could actually bring them more sustainability in the future. That's what we hope to do. And yeah, we actually now get a lot of information we had from farmers, and hopefully having this changing of law, yeah, in the future, as we are a candidate of EU, will make us cooperate even more, yeah. And of course we are trying, and we've been trying before, not to close the businesses, yeah. And at the moment we cannot say, yeah, you need to stop your production, but hey, let's change it, let's make it better for everyone, all participants, like farmers, consumers, and animals.
Does PETA still organize animal transfers from Ukraine to Poland?
I'm not sure about this, but what I know is that a lot of organizations did it, but you cannot make it kind of legally, yeah? So when you want to transport animals, you need to do it personally. And I guess they are not publishing it a lot here because at customs, yeah, people are very suspicious. And actually on my way here to the conference, I managed to get extra 6 animals to Germany. Yeah, so you could say that Open Cages Ukraine is also transporting animals. And I guess that PETA and all the other organizations are trying to do it, not like by hundreds, but a bit. Yeah, so we try to save whom we can.
Thank you for that, and thank you, because that was a last question. Let's make a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you so much.